Richard Kay, the writer who knew Diana best, and his colleague Geoffrey Levy bring you the full untold story of Diana and Camilla's bitter rivalry. The royal couple's problems were the result of the near 13-year age gap between them, according to Diana's aunt, Mary Roche. They were at very different stages of development, she says. Diana was young and had limited life experience, and Prince Charles was already a great thinker. He read a great deal. They were, perhaps, different people. Diana, too, felt the age difference would make romance impossible. Mary Robertson, whose son Patrick was nannied by Diana in the months when she was being courted by the Prince of Wales, recalls a Monday morning when Diana told her that she had spent the weekend with the Queen and her family at Balmoral. I said, "Were you up there with Andrew?" And she said, "Actually, no, I was up there seeing Charles, but he didn't invite me, his mother did." I asked if she thought anything would develop and she said, "No, he's 31 and I'm 19. He'll never look twice at me." I said, "I wouldn't be too sure." Sir William Heseltine, the Queen's former private secretary, recalls a weekend at Balmoral soon after the royal wedding when he came across Diana sitting all by herself under a tree engrossed in a book. "I went over and said, 'What on earth are you doing here?' says Sir William, 87. And she said in a rather mournful voice, 'I'm just reading up about one of my predecessors, Queen Adelaide.' Diana had been given the book by Charles. He was keen for her to know about Adelaide because when she married the future King William IV he was in his early 50s and she was only half his age. The parallels were obvious, with one additional plus: it was a happy marriage and they were devoted to each other. This even though he'd fathered 10 illegitimate children before their wedding. So perhaps Diana had Adelaide in mind when she wrote to her nanny Mary Clark some weeks after the wedding a letter of breathless happiness. "I adore being married and having someone to devote my time to," she declared. While in a letter to Mary Robertson she wrote of "my wonderful husband." For his part, Charles wrote to a friend, "All I can say is that marriage is very jolly." The truth was Diana felt Camilla's shadow everywhere but felt impotent to do anything about it. While Diana could hardly be unaware she was viewed around the globe as one of the great beauties of the age, she harbored private doubts about her covergirl looks. When the distinguished artist Israel Zohar was commissioned to paint her portrait in 1990 by the Royal Hussars Regiment of which she was colonel-in-chief, he found a young woman unhappy with certain physiological aspects of herself. In the painting she wears the midnight blue gown in which, 5 years earlier, she had danced with John Travolta for a spellbound audience at the White House. And yet, says Zohar, 72, there were a lot of defects she found in her face and body. And in a kind of humorous way she asked me to make corrections and improvements, especially with the nose. According to her fitness trainer Carolyn Brown, Diana wasn't very keen on her shoulders either, complaining, "I have a swimmer's physique and big shoulders, which I don't like." Tomasz Starczyewski, the fashion designer who dressed the princess from 1990 until her death, says, "She wasn't really curvy. She had more of a sportswoman's body." Her holistic practitioner Nish Joshi reveals that Diana had curvature of the spine. This was noticeable in her deportment because she tended to walk with her shoulders hunched, he says. It was exacerbated by her being self-conscious of how tall she was. "I persuaded her to celebrate her height and not bow her head and stoop or round her shoulders. She was concerned that William or Harry may have inherited this condition and I checked them over. They were fit and healthy." Camilla, on the other hand, was more self-confident. Whatever talk was flowing through the capital's gossipy salons, she remained Diana's publicly invisible foe. Privately, however, Mrs. Parker Bowles had a great deal to say, none of which, it must be said, indicated any form of conscience that she might be stealing another woman's husband. She felt nothing but contempt for the princess, according to a trusted royal aide. She used to refer to her as that mad cow. Some will view this as a shocking insight, indicating a streak of selfing ruthlessness. They may be surprised to learn that, in Camilla's eyes, she was the one deserving sympathy, not Diana, for having to pick up the pieces of Charles's broken life and prop him up in a bid to restore his confidence. She blamed Diana for everything, says the aide. She hated what she believed Diana was doing to Charles and held her responsible entirely for how low the prince was when he came to Camilla for comfort. In Camilla's eyes she was the one deserving sympathy, not Diana. Camilla's scornful attitude to Diana didn't end there. Far from being jealous of the princess's covergirl looks, Camilla was openly mocking among her circle of how Diana had gone from scrawny to muscly. She usually tacked on the observation that the princess didn't have a bosom to compare with her own. In the face of this onslaught, Diana referring to Camilla as the Rottweiler and describing her to her therapist friend Simone Simmons as that scarlet woman were pretty tame. According to Roberto Dvorak, who remained a friend of Diana all her adult life, she chose Rottweiler because, as she told him, Camilla didn't have the elegance to be called a pussycat. Everything she did barking loudly. But then, as her former nanny Mary Clark sees it now, that young girl was taken for a total ride. She wasn't mature enough to cope. As long ago as 1986, years before anyone outside royal circles knew there was any trouble in the marriage, Diana consulted astrologer Penny Thornton. They spent 4 hours looking at charts. I told her she needed to find a role for herself, something separate from being the wife of Prince Charles so that she could convert her own suffering into relating to other people who were suffering too, says Penny. I told her it would be a way of processing her own distress. That really struck a chord. One who had a close-up view of just how deeply Diana took that advice is Dame Esther Rantzen, founder of Childline, who knew the princess well. Her own pain gave her a unique empathy, says Dame Esther. It was instinctive. This was what drew the princess to Bonnie, a girl who contracted HIV through a blood transfusion when still in her mother Rebecca's womb and was dying of AIDS. Diana sent her a signed picture of herself in a silver frame, but Bonnie died, aged 12, before Diana could visit her in hospital. The princess invited Rebecca to lunch at Kensington Palace a few months later, but she too died of AIDS soon afterwards. When Esther was telling the great heart surgeon Sir Magdi Yacoub about it, he revealed to her that the princess used to slip into the wards at the Royal Brompton Hospital late at night and sit on the beds comforting children in pain or unable to sleep. She had special colored nail polish with her and would paint their nails, giving them moments of happiness in their sometimes very short lives, says Esther. Lady Glenconner, friend and lady-in-waiting to Princess Margaret, still thinks with great warmth of Diana, who went to see her Bohemian son Henry in St. Mary's Hospital, Paddington, when he was dying of AIDS in 1989. She cherishes their little exchange when he told a surprised Diana they had something in common: "You've now got my nanny." He was referring to his childhood nanny Barbara Barnes, who had been looking after William and Harry at Kensington Palace. Diana wrote me a very nice letter after Henry died saying how brave she thought he was and how much she admired him for helping others by coming out and saying he had AIDS, says Lady Glenconner, 85. And there was Diana's landmines crusade, of course. The late Lord Deeds, the distinguished journalist and former government minister, had campaigned about their evil for years. It became a great mission for him, says his son Jeremy. But only a few people took much notice. Then Diana got involved and suddenly everyone was talking about it. My father was thrilled. Diana might have seen off a lesser woman, but Mrs. Parker Bowles was always going to be a formidable foe who had, as one of her closest friends puts it, seen it all and done most of it. She also understood men drawn from the British upper classes whose marriages like her own were euphemistically described as open. Diana never understood this concept of an open marriage, says Mary Clark. To her, marriage was a matter of love, trust, and loyalty. She would have been thrilled that Catherine and William so clearly love each other, happy that they have what she never managed to have. Astrologer Penny Thornton, whom Diana began to consult in 1986, was one of the first people that the princess turned to for guidance about Camilla. I remember telling her that she had to entertain the enemy instead of turning Camilla into the other woman. She had to embrace her, invite her to dinner, to include her, to engage her, says Penny. She did try to follow this advice but soon realized that there was no point. According to Penny, Diana remained very ambivalent about whether she wanted the marriage to succeed or not. But that was completely normal because people are like that, she says. So at times she would be saying, "Oh God, we can't even speak." And at other times she'd say, "We're inching together bit by bit, drawing closer." But it went up and down. Diana, of course, began to see other men only when she realized that Charles had returned to Camilla. As ever, Mrs. Parker Bowles was dismissive about the princess. "At least I got that out of my system before I married," she was known to say when Diana's romantic life cropped up, a curious observation, you may think, from a woman who was cheating on her own husband with the Prince of Wales. But the relationships of both women were never quite as clandestine as they thought. They shared the consternation and embarrassment of being the victims of secretly taped telephone conversations. Diana's squidgy tape and Mrs. Parker Bowles's Camillagate tape emerged within 5 months of each other, to their respective horror. Diana's conversation, with motor racing executive James Gilby, ranged principally over her complaints about the royal family. Camilla's, with Prince Charles, included passages of mutual longing. "Charles, I need you several times a week." "Camilla, I need you all the week, all the time." Charles also memorably tells her, "Your great achievement is to love me." Publication of these tapes became the opening salvos in what was to become the War of the Waleses, the protracted 4-year battle for public sympathy and support that wasn't to end until the divorce in 1996. So who came out on top? History will say it was Camilla. She, after all, got the prince. But not before her reputation had been savaged by Diana in the infamous Panorama interview. She never actually named Camilla but cast her cuckoo image into every front room in the land with the phrase, "There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." The question that is still stimulating drawing room debate 2 decades after Diana's death is whether, had she been more mature when she married Charles, she might have had the weaponry to see off her experienced rival. One incident suggests she might have. It was during the summer a few weeks after their divorce, and the prince, flying back to London from an engagement, found himself caught short as his helicopter landed in its usual spot behind Kensington Palace, where Diana still lived, leaving him with a 15-minute drive to his own residence at St. James's Palace. He phoned to ask if he could use her bathroom and she said, "Fine, come in." His motorcycle escort removed their helmets as they waited for the prince to answer his call of nature. 5 minutes later he emerged and walked to his car. As Diana's then chef, Darren McGrady, recalls, he was just about to get in the car when the princess shouted out within earshot of the escort, "Same time next week, Charles," and winked. The prince went bright red. That told me there was still something between them, something, I suspect, he knew he'd lost.